Can Barca lose Julián Álvarez's signing because of Julián Álvarez himself? Until this morning, it seemed impossible. Right now, it's the question that scares the most inside the offices of the club Azulgrana. If you're a fan, give it a like right now, because what just happened in Cerro del Espino with Julián Álvarez is going to take your sleep away tonight. And subscribe, because everything that happens in the next few hours with this signing will be told here before anywhere else. Because what happened this morning in Cerro del Espino wasn't in any of the scenarios that Barca had calculated. It wasn't in Deco's script. It wasn't in the script of Julián's agent. And of course, it wasn't in the script of Julián himself, who came to training with very clear instructions from all the parties involved and with the sincere intention of fulfilling them all without exception. He didn't fulfill them all. But to understand what happened this morning, we have to understand what happened yesterday. Because yesterday, Julián Álvarez did something that, inside Atlético Madrid, nobody expected him to do on the first official day after returning from his long international holidays. He passed the mandatory medical recognition that the club requires of all its players at the beginning of the preseason, as if nothing. And after passing that recognition, he went home directly without anything else, without appearing in Cerro del Espino, without training with his teammates that day, without giving any official explanation to the club or to his teammates. That, in football, has a name. It's called declaring oneself in rebellion. And inside Atlético Madrid, Julián's absence was interpreted exactly like that by the entire squad and the coaching staff, as a sign that the Argentine player has no intention of behaving like a club player while his situation is not resolved in the way he wants. Julián wants to go to Barca. He said it publicly during the World Cup. He repeated it in private. And he demonstrated it yesterday with his absence in training. The message was clear to anyone who wanted to read it. The problem was that message didn't suit Barca at all. Because Barca doesn't need Julián Álvarez to send messages to Atlético Madrid. Barca needs Julián Álvarez to get to Camp Nou in the best possible physical conditions, with a rhythm of competition, with games on the legs, with the confidence that only gives to play regularly in a level team. And none of those things happen if Julián sits at home while Simeone trains the rest of the squad without him. Deco was the one who took the initiative without waiting for more time or more signals of any kind. According to sources close to the surroundings of Club Azulgrana, which this channel knows, the Barca sports director called Julián Álvarez's agent personally and directly, and was absolutely clear and forceful in each of the things he said that same afternoon. That the player had to go to training without fail, that he couldn't declare himself in rebellion publicly, that if Simeone sat him on the bench as a reprisal and the signing was delayed for weeks or even months, Julián would arrive at Barca having lost a period of physical and competitive focus that is not easily recovered with any training, that Barca needed to sign him in the best possible way, not half-heartedly and without the necessary competitive rhythm after months without playing regularly in any competition. The agent transferred the message to Julián that same night, and Julián, this morning, did exactly what Deco had asked him to do. He got up, took the car and appeared on Cerro del Espino ready to train and show that he could take it. What no one had told Julián was how Simeone was going to receive him when he saw him appear through that door. Because Simeone is many things. He is the longest-serving coach in the history of Atlético de Madrid. He is one of the most respected coaches in European football. He is a man who has built his entire career on loyalty, commitment, and collective sacrifice above any individual interest of any player. And he is someone who, when a player lacks respect with an absence without justification, does not forget it simply because it is convenient for him to forget it. Simeone was on the pitch when Julián arrived at Cerro del Espino. He saw him appear and did nothing. He did not approach him, he did not greet him, he did not look at him. He continued to give instructions to the rest of the team as if Julián Álvarez did not exist in that training ground. Julián changed, went out on the pitch and waited for instructions. The instructions arrived very soon, but not from Simeone directly or from any member of the coaching staff with an important position. They arrived through one of the physical coaches who approached Julián and told him something that the Argentine definitely did not expect to hear on his first day back to work after the World Cup, that he had to do an hour of continuous race. Because yesterday he had not gone to training, and in Atlético Madrid that has a very specific consequence that Simeone applies without exception to any player, regardless of his name or his market price or whether he wants to leave or stay. The one who does not appear when he has to appear, runs. An hour without a ball, without teammates, just going around the pitch while the rest does their normal job with total normality. Julián looked at the coach for a second, took a deep breath and started running without saying a word, because he remembered what Deco had told him, because he remembered what his agent had asked him, because somewhere in his head there was still a voice telling him to hold on, that Barca would arrive, that it was only a matter of time, that the worst thing he could do was give Simeone a reason to complicate the weeks that were left of the market. Julián ran, without saying a word, an hour under the sun of Cerro dell'Espino while his teammates warmed up and worked with the ball, doing exactly the type of training that a striker of his level needs to get in shape on the first day of the league. And when he finished that hour of continuous race, Julián thought that the worst had happened, that Simeone had applied his usual punishment, that now the normal work with the group would come, that he could touch the ball, that he could show that he was committed, that even if he wanted to leave, he would do it correctly. He was very wrong. What came next was what ended up completely breaking everything that Barca and his agent had built with so much patience and so many calls during the hours prior to that training. There is something about the figure of Julián Álvarez that deserves to be said before telling what happened after that hour of continuous race. Because Julián is not a capricious player, nor is he particularly impulsive. He is someone who, for years in Manchester City and in Atlético de Madrid, has shown remarkable emotional maturity, which goes far beyond what his age could suggest at first glance. But there is something that Julián cannot stand, something that, according to the people who know him, activates in him an answer that no Deco instruction can fully control. The feeling that he is deliberately humiliated, that he is treated as if he were not the player he is, that someone uses power to make him feel small in front of everyone. And that is exactly what was about to happen when he finished his continuous hour of race under the sun of Cerro dell'Espino with all his teammates watching him closely. Because while Julián was running alone, Simeone had given instructions to go to work with the ball, matches, tactical exercises, the kind of work that makes you feel like a real footballer. When Julián finished his hour of race and looked at the field, he saw all his teammates touching the ball. All of them except him, because the coach approached him with a new message from Simeone, that it was not yet his time, that first he had to do speed work with cones, explosive exercises. Without the ball, only he against the cones while the team played at 10 meters. Julián Álvarez looked at the cones, looked at the field where his teammates were playing with the ball, looked at the physical coach who was giving Simeone instructions, and something inside him broke. Not suddenly, not with a visible explosion, but in the most silent and forceful way that can break something inside a person. Julián turned around, walked to the side of the field, found one of the fridges that the teams place around the facilities so that the players have water during training, and sat in it. Like this, without saying anything to anyone, without looking at Simeone, without looking at his teammates, without gesturing or protesting out loud. He sat in a fridge next to the field as the most eloquent gesture of rebellion that can be made without saying absolutely a single word. That moment in the Cerro dell'Espino was seen by everyone without exception. The players of Atlético de Madrid, who were training with the ball 10 meters away, Simeone's coaching staff, who had been deliberately ignoring Julián for a while, following the instructions of their coach, the physical coaches, the team doctor present that morning, everyone who was in that training field saw Julián Álvarez sitting in a fridge looking into the void, while Atlético de Madrid was still training without him as if nothing had happened. And everyone knew exactly what it meant. It meant that Julián had reached his personal limit, that the time of continuous running under the sun had been acceptable inside his head because it was Simeone's normal punishment, and he had endured it remembering everything Deco had told him. But that the second humiliation of working alone with cones while all his teammates touched the ball was a step too high to continue crossing. That there was a very clear difference between fulfilling the punishment for having missed training and accepting to be treated as if he were a second-rate player inside a field where he had been the best of all for years. And Julián made a decision at that moment that his agent and Deco had asked him not to take. That Simeone had been waiting for decades for a player to dare to take in front of him, and that Julián's teammates in that field saw with a mixture of understanding and fear what was going to happen next. Simeone was on the other side of the field when one of his coaches discreetly informed him of what was happening. And according to the sources this channel knows, what happened in the next 30 seconds was something they hadn't seen in a long time in Cerro dell'Espino. Simeone stopped training in the middle of nowhere. He didn't shout a single time. He didn't make any exaggerated gesture. He simply stopped everything that was happening in that field with the calm and forceful authority of someone who doesn't need to raise his voice for everyone to understand that the situation has just changed completely. He walked towards Julián Álvarez, alone, without coaches by his side, without assistants following him. He alone crossing the field towards the fridge where his most valuable striker was sitting. The Atletico players stopped touching the ball, not because no one told them to, because when Simeone walks that way towards someone in a training session, everyone knows that what is going to happen deserves total attention. Simeone got to where Julián was, sitting in that fridge. He stood right in front of him, looking at him directly, and he said something that, according to the sources this channel knows, lasted less than 10 seconds, but that will be recorded in the memory of all those who were present in that field that morning for a long time. He told him not to come back, that he didn't want to see him again. Those words, in that order, without shouting, without insults, without more explanation than that, the most definitive sentence that Simeone could pronounce in a training field, said with the calm of someone who has been in football for decades and knows exactly what those words mean when he says them. Julián Álvarez didn't answer. He didn't look Simeone in the eye at any time. He didn't gesticulate or protest loudly. He got up from the fridge calmly and walked slowly towards the tunnel that leads to the changing rooms of Cerro dell'Espino, without running, without being shaken externally, with the same tense and contained calm that he had sat in that fridge minutes before. He entered the gym and didn't leave the field again. Atlético Madrid's training continued without Julián Álvarez. Simeone returned to his positions. The players resumed work with the ball, and outside the field, no one said anything out loud about what had just happened, because in Simeone's teams there is an unwritten rule that everyone knows, that what happens in the training field stays in the training field until the club decides to communicate it in another way. But what happened in Cerro dell'Espino this morning was no longer something that could stay inside the training field. It was too big, too visible, too important for the consequences that it was going to have in the immediate future of one of the most important signings of the Spanish market. Deco found out what happened in Cerro dell'Espino before the training ended. According to the sources that this channel knows, the reaction of the Barca sports director was a very complex mixture of genuine concern and absolute disbelief about what they were telling him. Because Deco had done exactly what he had to do. He had called, he had warned, he had explained in detail why it was important for Julián to hold out. And Julián had held out for 90 minutes before making the decision that Deco had asked him not to make. The question that Barca is asking right now is the most uncomfortable that a club that has in its hands the signing that most wants to close in this market can do. How long can Julián Álvarez hold out in this situation? Days? Weeks? And if the signing does not close before the market closes, what happens then with a player who has just been expelled from a training by his own coach and who has months ahead of him without knowing if he is going to play or not? Those questions do not have an easy answer. And the consequences of not having a quick answer are exactly what we tell now in the last part of this story. There is something about the gesture of the refrigerator that deserves to be analyzed in more depth because it says a lot about Julián's mental state at this time. Because Julián did not sit in that refrigerator because he lost control. He sat down because he made a conscious decision, calculated. He chose that specific gesture because he knew what it meant and wanted it to mean exactly that. Sitting in a refrigerator next to the field while the team trains is not an impulsive reaction of someone who cannot control himself. It is a statement that says that the player is not going to do what they are asking him to do, that he has reached a point where the cost of obeying is higher than the cost of disobeying, and that he is willing to assume the consequences of that disobedience, although those consequences include a phrase from Simeone that no player from Atlético Madrid had received in a long time. Julián made that decision knowing perfectly what was coming next. And that says absolutely everything about how his head is at the moment. And about how urgent it has become for Barca to close this operation at once before the situation becomes even more complicated and irreversible than it is this morning after what happened. The problem that Barca has right now with Julián Álvarez is not Atlético Madrid. It is not the price, nor the negotiation between clubs, nor the position of Gil Marín. The real and most urgent problem is Julián himself. A player who this morning clearly demonstrated that he is not willing to endure what Barca needs him to endure so that the signing closes in the best possible conditions for everyone. And that changes everything. Because the scenario that Deco had in mind when he called Julián's people yesterday in the afternoon was a very specific one. Julián goes to training, fulfills what Simeone asks of him, maintains his physical level, does not give starters that complicate the negotiation. And Barca works in parallel to convince Atlético Madrid to accept an offer that until now has rejected. That was the roadmap. That was the way to get to the end of the market with Julián Álvarez signing for Barca in the best conditions for everyone. Julián just broke that roadmap this morning. Not in the middle of the process. Not when there were already signs that the situation was getting complicated. In the first training. On the first day that Barca asked him to endure. That is not a good omen for what comes later. Because what comes later can be very long and very painful for everyone. Atlético Madrid is not going to give in easily under any concept. Gilmarin has been very clear in his public and private position. They do not want to sell Julián Álvarez in this market. And if they sell him, they want a price that Barca clearly considers excessive given the context. While that gap between what Atlético asks and what Barca is willing to pay does not close definitively, Julián will have to keep showing up at Cerro del Espino every morning. Or not showing up. Because this morning, Simeone expelled him from training in front of everyone. And nobody still knows for sure what will happen tomorrow when Julián has to return. If Simeone decides that Julián cannot train with the group until his situation is resolved, the player will lose weeks of preparation. Weeks in which his Atlético teammates will be working with the ball, playing preseason matches, competing. And Julián will be at the gym or at home, waiting for Barca and Atlético to reach an agreement that may not reach before the market closes. And here is the problem that Barca does not want to admit publicly, but that in private is taking away their sleep from this morning. That signing Julián Álvarez in January or in the next summer market is perfectly possible. But signing Julián Álvarez after months without playing, without training regularly and without competition rhythm is not the same as signing him now. Barca wants the Julián who made the World Cup, who made Argentina the most dangerous team in the tournament with Lautaro, who arrived at Atlético Madrid and scored 23 goals in the league, who when he is in shape and with rhythm is one of the 3 best strikers in the world without any doubt possible. That Julián needs to compete every week, needs real matches with pressure and scorers, needs the confidence that only gives play in a completely regular way week after week in a high-level team. And if he spends the next few months without doing any of that, what will arrive at the Camp Nou in January will not be that Julián that everyone wants to see. It will be a version of Julián that will take months to recover the level that Barca needs from him from the first official game. That's what Deco was trying to avoid with that call yesterday. That's what Julián's agent was trying to avoid when he convinced him to go to training this morning. And that's exactly what Julián didn't understand or didn't want to understand when he sat in that fridge and waited for Simeone to come and tell him what he was going to tell him. There's something else that deserves to be said about this situation, about what this morning's gesture means for the relationship between Julián and Barca beyond the signing itself. Because Barca is seeing live how a player who says he wants to sign for them is acting in a way that complicates that signing in an active way. That he's prioritizing his personal war with Simeone over the instructions of the club that wants to sign him. That when he had to choose between what Deco asked him and what his instinct told him, he chose instinct. That's not a determining problem right now to close the signing, but it could become a very serious problem later on if Julián makes similar decisions inside the Barca dressing room when he doesn't like something or when the situation doesn't go as he expects. And that's something that Flick will have to evaluate and analyze calmly before the signing is definitively closed. Barca wants Julián Álvarez. That hasn't changed with this morning. What has changed is the urgency. The feeling that the clock is ticking and that every day that goes by without the signing being closed is a day that Julián could be missing something that Barca will have to recover. The ball is now on the roof of Atlético Madrid and Barca knows it better than anyone. The club will try to speed up the negotiations in a significant way after what happened this morning at Cerro del Espino. It will try to present an offer that Atlético can't easily reject before Julián's situation becomes completely unsustainable for all parties involved. Because what Barca can't allow under no circumstances is to arrive in January with Julián without having played a single minute of competition since August. There's a question that no one in football is asking, but it's the most important of all. What happens if Atlético Madrid holds out until the end of the transfer window? What happens if Gilmarin doesn't give in? What happens if the price Atletico asks never becomes the price Barca is willing to pay? In that scenario, Julián Álvarez would spend the entire season at Atlético Madrid with Simeone after everything that happened this morning at Cerro del Espino after El Cholo told him in front of the whole team that he doesn't want to see him again in his training ground. That scenario is the worst anyone can imagine in this story right now. The worst for Julián personally, the worst for Atletico institutionally, and also the worst for Barca that would arrive at the next summer market trying to sign a player who will have spent an entire season in the worst possible environment inside his own club. But it is also the most possible scenario if no one gives in the next crucial days of the market. What Julián has not yet understood from the gymnasium of Cerro del Espino where he is right now is that his best ally in this situation is not the rebellion. It is the performance. It is to show in each training that he is the best player in Simeone's squad, even if Simeone doesn't want him to be. It is to get to Barca in the best possible way when the signing closes because that Julián is worth every euro that Barca is going to pay for him, and that Julián is exactly what the Cule fans are waiting to see in the Camp Nou. The other Julián, the one who sits in the fridge and goes to the gym, that Julián also exists, and this morning he appeared when it was not convenient for him to appear. Subscribe and like because this story is not over and everything that happens to Julián Álvarez in the next few hours we tell here before anyone else.